I'd like to welcome you to the latest podcast of Candid Conversations, brought to you in part by 444 Inspiring.
Yeah, the Back to Blacklist was not. It ended up as a creation actually of my wife's, but it was created off of a couple of Facebook statuses that I posted in the wake of the verdict in the George Zimmerman trial for the murder of Trayvon Martin. So, the whole thought process behind the Back to Blacklist and what it says actually started in my mind. It's pretty interesting, to give all the backdrop. That verdict came out in July of 2013. And I was in the middle of a move, moving my family from the U.S. to Singapore. And I was already living in Singapore. I had been working and commuting to Asia for like a year and a half. In fact, in 2012, when it was February 2012, when Trayvon Martin's death sort of got national attention. It was like a month after the actual murder. And everyone was like, put your hoodies on, because he was described as having a hoodie, and then put it on social media. And now, while I guess I never had any issue with like showing any type of unity, I felt it was at the end of the day very useless to do these type of forms of anything.
Why is that?
Well, because, at the end of the day, social media is a window into real life, but it's not real life. So you put it on hoodies, but what does that do except draw attention? And, it wasn't even drawing attention to an unknown traumatic experience. It was already known, had already got national attention, and then it was like, oh, okay, well, we're showing solidarity at the end of the day. And, I'm just really into actionable items. So I made a post in February 2012 about I don't have a hoodie with me in Japan. If I did, I wouldn't be posting a picture of that anyway. I wear hoodies all the time, but that's not the point. The point is, what about our hoods? What about the fact that even though Sanford, Florida, which is like 45 minutes from where I was actually living at the time in Tampa, it has a black population, but where they lived in the sort of subdivision, like, gated community, Trayvon's dad or his girlfriend or whoever was living there was really there because the idea that these places are nicer to live. Not just in the homes and the structure, because I think it was like, sort of middle to lower income type of neighborhood. But, one of the first things that everyone talks about when they talk about these gated communities is the safety, right? But we know they're not safe for us, especially as black men. You walking around those places at night, you a suspect. Usually it's not some overzealous, was a little punk in high school, fake security guard, neighborhood watch dude. Most of the time it's the police, which is usually even more dire, and you feel less powerful, or you feel even more powerless with it. So, but why do you feel like that would bring safety versus those of us who could, so upwardly mobile, middle, even working lower class or working middle class and the upper middle class, why wouldn't we create safe spaces in our historically black communities? That has always been sort of my premise, because we could do a lot of saving ourselves if that was the case. So if you fast forward to when the verdict was released, everyone felt such this despair because it was like open and shut in our eyes, because too many of us have been there. Too many of us have been in a situation where some white boy was talking some shit and we just was, basically trying to do everything to avoid a conflict, and then ended up not avoiding the conflict, but then mixing on them. And then they know tough guys anymore. When you hear about, he was, he had candy and iced tea and all of these things, we had already written, the ending in our head. So when the verdict came back, which seemed open and shut to us, it was such a blow and devastation to our morale as a people. I didn't want to stay there. I thought about it. I felt so powerless. I'm in a foreign country, and all the stuff that I've ever talked is about being there, being upwardly mobile, educated, for lack of a better term, the haves versus the have-nots, even though I was born into sort of the have-nots, like sort of being able to climb a social rung, on the ladder of classedness, buying into that a little bit. But at the end of the day, I was disconnected, I felt. So on Facebook, I was just simply like, okay, here are some of the things that we can do. And they were like 2 posts of like 1 through 6 and then 7 through 12 or something like that. Well, the reaction to that was pretty substantial. So my wife was like, this needs to be sort of archived, or, we need to put this in and call it what it is. And she developed the name of the Back to Black list, because the direction and outcry for most of that is saying, very specific things to do to go back to trying to help ourselves and save ourselves. So, but number one is why the Back to Black list is sometimes viewed as controversial. Number one on the Back to Black list says, get a gun and learn how to use it. So
why is that controversial in some people's eyes?
Well, I think that anytime a black person is talking about getting a gun, it becomes controversial. So, when it was rapped about, even though it was in every movie, and even though rock stars talked about it, it became, oh, look at this demonized figure. Black people talking, black niggas with guns is an issue. You know what I mean? This is just, this is an issue, right? And, but I think that, where I was starting from, and this is one of the things with my thought process, I always start at the end, right? So, like, if you're playing chess, I know the last move I want to make, even if I don't know the moves to get there, right? So, the get a gun was number one, because the number one excuse I hear when number two was saying relocate into black communities. The number one excuse I hear about number two is about this feeling of safety, right? So it's like, if in the American psyche, guns are a part of breathing air.
It's American culture.
It's American culture. You can't go now. See, and when people think about it, they think about the NRA or all these things. White people with guns is something like, oh, it's my, it's my right. All of these things with black people with guns. Yeah, it gets very, very gray. Demonized and gray.
It's in the gray area.
Exactly.
Talking about our
but
rights.
But my granddaddy, the first gun that I ever saw, I was 8 years old. My uncle, he pulled it out of his ceiling and he was like, look, I'm going to show you how to use this tomorrow. And he told me the severity and the seriousness of guns when I was 8 years old. My granddaddy had his grandfather's World War I rifle. Okay. And of course that was just sort of like a relic. But he had guns. My grandma carried a 22 in her bra. I've always been around guns, even with old folks with guns. You know what I mean? So I've never been.
Ooh, it's a gun.
Yeah, you know what I mean. And whether it's a false sense or a real sense, it gives a sense of security in America if you have a gun. That's what it is. So it is powerful if you've ever shot a gun. No, absolutely. If you know how to use a gun and what it's used for, everyone says the number one reason they have guns in their home is for safety, right? So that's basically what the edict was like, okay, you feel unsafe around your own people. Meanwhile, if you take a step back, you think about lions, how they hunt, right?
In packs and groups.
They hunt in packs and groups, and they're waiting. But, lions, most powerful animal in the jungle. They're not waiting to take down an entire other pack. They're waiting for that one straggler, to get off from their group, and that's who they go after, right? So when you're black in America and you're a minority, right? So you're 13% of the population, and then you decide to venture out and go to these places where you're not with your group, right, and you're singled out, it makes it a lot easier to be hunted. And make no mistake about it, we have been and are being hunted. There's no other explanation for what happens, right? So, disproportionately killed by the state. And that's what we're talking about. And then no punitive damage for the person who did it. For the perpetrator of such.
He gets away.
Yeah. Whoever it is gets away. They can be an agent of the state, like a police officer, or they can just be
neighborhood security.
A neighborhood watch, and they get away with it 9 times out of 10, right? So in my mind, I'm clear. Like, I grew up in the inner city. I grew up in cities, and I have never, ever felt comfortable in suburbs. It just feels different. The eyes are watching. You can feel people looking at you. So for me, I've never felt safe in these environments. But for others who feel safer there, their kids safer there, I'd rather go to a place where, I really do know my neighbors. I may know their grandparents. I may know their parents, a community, right? And I am not at all... I'm not at all confused about what that looks like. I know it's not a perfect, beloved community type of euphoric place or utopia that's sitting there for us. But I do know that if we had, what Du Bois called the talented 10th, or what Pareto called the 80-20, where you got, 20% doing 80% of the work, or you got your top 10% pulling up the rest of the 90%. If we prescribe to any of those theories as a people, we would be much better off. So the Back to Black list was really a rallying cry for the talented 10th. It's saying, come up out of those suburbs. You can be more and mean more to your people, and you will have more benefit of being around your people than the exploitation that happens on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights.
But it's nice in the suburbs. And it's safer. And the schools are better.
Safe for who? And the schools are better for who? Because the third point on the Back to Black list, or the fourth point, was take your child out of these white schools and put them in the black schools.
But the black schools don't have the same resources.
The black schools don't have the same resources because they don't have the same tax base. So that goes back to number 2, which is saying come out of those suburbs and move into these communities and spend your tax dollars there. And they don't have the leadership and thought and the personnel that comes from the community to really lead on their behalf. So when I was growing up, my mom was a working mother. I played sports. She was never at my games. I was in National Honor Society. She was at few ceremonies because she was working and we were working poor. And so she couldn't engage in the community. But I'm married. My wife has her own business. She has the flexibility to be in and out of our daughter's school when she wants to be. And she's able to do that because she doesn't have to, provide that. And I have a job where if I wanted to be at the school, I could be involved and engaged in the school as well. And so you're lended, or you are lending your cultural competency and your intellectual capital to these organizations that need these types of resources, right? And so when you go out to the suburbs, and then for black folks, we oftentimes like to show and prove that we belong in these places. So we end up leading the PTA or whatever it is in the suburbs as well, which is outrageous, which is like, the people that need you, they don't need you out here. But then you got 4 black people, the head of the PTA, and the school's perfect. We got A+ rating, and it's 95% white, and the head of our PTA is, Rashida Jackson. Like, what? Like, what's happening here? So, I think that there's a lot of excuses on why it couldn't work. And so the Back to Black list was saying, look, here's why it needs to work, why it has to work. And the number 1 excuse, your safety issue, let's start with the gun. So that was point A about, here's the gun, safety. B is community policing. So the thing about the suburbs that's really cool, you don't have an occupation of military in the suburbs. And because they're majority white. What I mean is the police
They're not policing all the citizens.
Exactly. You don't go 2-4 blocks and then people getting busted for petty crimes. And we know it's documented. More crimes are committed in the suburbs.
Yeah, but
whether
there's
it's
not more police.
Yeah, exactly. That's why there's not more arrests. But we do know there's more illegal and illicit activity happening in the suburbs than are happening in the inner cities because that's all been documented. So what I'm saying is, if I have a tax base that's strong and then can demand and has the leadership and the initiative in their thought to say, why do we have 5 police in this area? Why am I paying for that? I don't want them here.
Because these people are more violent.
What we will be saying is that we don't believe that. We don't, it's the same thing. What the most simplest way to explain this is like black people taking an active role in gentrifying our own neighborhoods, basically, because when the gay white guy, usually that's sort of like the first army ant that goes out into gentrification opportunity, is you find like one gay white guy show up one day as your neighbor, okay, and he just bought a house and he's going to rehab the house and he has no fear about living in this neighborhood that supposedly has crackheads and all these things and blight and, all these things wrong with it. And then, 2 to 3 years down the line, half the neighborhood is white. Is because he saw an opportunity, low value in housing and a great deal, going to refurb it. And from the day he moves there, he's calling, whether it's the police to come or leave, he's directing them. He's saying, no, I'm a taxpayer here. I pay your salary. This is what you're going to do on my behalf. So what I'm saying, instead of black people being a market lagger and following what happens in the market, is to take control, because the benefits are endless when you move into areas where the housing has been devalued or all of these things that happen. So I mean, that's before you get to the benefits. But the point is, there's opportunity to do so, and there's opportunity to do it right because we see it all around us. Now, how is the gay white guy not afraid to live around us, but we're afraid to live around ourselves?
When you put it that way, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And that was the whole point of the Back to Black list, to say, let's create these enclaves where we can have what we know from history, right? So before Truman ran all the interstates through every
hood, every black community,
black community everywhere, we had thriving enclaves. And, the best examples of them we hear in the history books of Tulsa and the Greenwood, Archer Palmer. Yeah, we hear about that. The race riots is what they call them, but it was terroristic acts. We hear about all of those things, but that's one end of the continuum of these thriving Black Wall Street examples. But there was a lot of other stuff in between there, like just regular living and working, where the doctor and the lawyer lived on the same block with the janitor and the, auto factory worker. And their children benefited from that, right? Seeing something different. So the auto factory worker or janitor's child, whose parents weren't well off, saw a role model in the lawyer or the doctor and could see themselves as that. So 25 years later, they're not a janitor or an auto worker. They're a lawyer and a doctor in the same, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but if you're not in a neighborhood where you don't live next to the black lawyer, the black doctor, the black business person, the finance, the VC, the hedge fund person, when you don't live in that neighborhood, you don't see that person.
Right.
Now you're not exposed to them.
That's
so basically, at the core of that, as a teacher, you teach students to dream and see beyond, and your job is to expose them to information.
Exactly.
But if there are none of those people, then the next generation, what do they see?
Exactly. And so when you have a generation, and my generation now, which are the parents of children that are in school, we were all, if we weren't the children of crack, then we were definitely the friends of the children of crack. So meaning, all of my friends and family members have at least one family member who has been affected by crack somehow, whether it's the drug abuse or it was the dealer and it was a tough, sentencing. And so time being served and, federal penitentiaries and families, completely
eviscerated.
Yeah, eviscerated. I mean, that's not just a CNN headline. Like, that's real, especially for my generation. Being, born into the 80s and came of age in the 90s, sort of out here on our own. We see and we feel what happens when those role models aren't around. is what I'm saying. And but back to the point of the Back to Blacklist is most of what ails us is there's a solve or a balm to fix it within us. Like, we don't have to look anywhere else. The over policing is the root cause of these murders that happen and these defenses of I feared for my life. If we can create communities and then in those communities say that we demand community police, so police officers who live in the community, you're not going to see that. You're just not going to see it, and I can say that wholeheartedly because that's the community I grew up in. The police liaison officer at my school was from a family of police officers. If your last name was Adams from North Minneapolis, you were going to be a police officer. Whether it was your uncle, your granddaddy, or you were a child of, my one of my tightest homeboys now, he is the head coach of our football team, from high school. He just won a state championship with them, and he's a police officer. So it's not like we have this idea that police officers are bad. But we do know that there's a higher probability for some stupid shit to happen if that police officer has no understanding of individuals in that community and the community as a whole. And that's what's really happening with that issue, or that's what sparked the Back to Blacklist. But then all of the other issues that we face, the unemployment rates, where they're always at least double, most of the time triple for black folks, no matter what it is for everyone else, that is that is a direct correlation to the fact that we don't have enough businesses. We don't have enough businesses because we don't support our businesses. We don't.
Why do you think we don't support our own business?
I think one of the biggest reasons is locale. So the people with money. So first off, when you think about economies, right, and you think about the type of businesses that are easier to start, they're service businesses. So within service businesses and then service economy, that's discretionary disposable income. The people with discretionary disposable income are not the working poor who currently live in our communities. They're the haves or that talented 10th. So if we're going to spend money with our businesses that exist now, they're service jobs, right? They're service opportunities, whether it's landscaping or it's, taxes, CPA, or, lawyers or doctors or whatever it is. They're service generated businesses. They're not manufacturing industry, businesses of industry, because that takes too much capital that we don't have to start. Number one, there's the restaurant or the baker or whatever it is. To be able to support that, you've got to have money you can throw away, and we do that. We do it very well in the suburbs, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons we ran to the suburbs, was because they have all of the amenities. They have the shopping plazas where we can go spend all of our discretionary disposable income. And so when you go back to that, but these businesses are opportunities for people to be employed, because we also know, I mean, the stats are very clear. 75% of people who are employed in America are employed by small businesses. And small businesses defined as $250 million or lower in gross sales, gross revenue per year. So 75% of people in America are employed by a business that's not a Fortune 500 corporation or even a Fortune 1000 corporation, a $1 billion corporation. It's $250 million or less. And in those businesses, they are 80% likely to hire people that they feel comfortable with and or look like them. So in those businesses, if small businesses, which all black businesses for the most part are the number one employers of people, and we don't have businesses, then it's like, oh, that's the correlation why our unemployment rates are always double, right? And so if I'm not working, if I don't have money, then everything else is on the table, right?
Absolutely.
So Martin Luther King said, wherever there's no economy, immorality will surely prevail, right? So the number one thing is economy. And we can't begin to create economies and support our businesses if we don't live around them. It's too difficult. It's too much of an ask.
It's a task.
Yeah, it's too much for me to say,
45
support black business. You live 45 minutes away and you want to get a pizza. Nobody's doing that.
When Domino's and Pizza Hut,
yeah, exactly.
right down the street.
Nobody's doing that. So the number one thing is move into black communities, right? But you scared, so that's why I put number one on the list to say, get you a gun and then move into black communities. And then take your child out of the white school and put them in the black school. And make that school better, right? Because I can tell you now, like any school my child goes to, I'm just not going to take the way things are, right? If I got to sit myself in the class for a week and let my presence be felt, and I have friends who are like that. So if we get 10 kids to be in a school where they're used to performing and they know they have a responsibility to perform and be scholastically exceptional, which is, everybody that I went to college with, that was the modus operandi for everybody in all of their households. It was an expectation that this was going to happen, versus my older brother and sister, where it was like, hey, they may or may not go to college. Like, it was you going to college? Oh, that's a big thing for, people I grew up around versus people I went to college with, where it was an expectation, right? It's about expectations, right? So if the expectation is different, you're going to get a different result in the way that the schools are set up now.
But the expectation is you're not going to be or do anything. Exactly.
That's what's going to happen. But then, if the expectation is you're going to continue on in your education, then the opportunity to be a hardened or a petty criminal is out the door. You're going to be much more focused on doing the right thing. And so with that, you're going to, if you get educated, they say education is a great equalizer. Well, the right education is a great equalizer, right? So if you get educated and then you enter back into these communities and you're able to spend money in these communities, it's a cycle. You're going to improve all of these things, right? And, the criminal element, perceived or not, will be lessened, and the need for all of those police will be lessened in these communities. And so that's really the push of the Back to Black list. There's only the list has 10 things on it, but there's only 5 actionable things, or let me say 5 very concrete, tangible things to say, do this, go from here to there, like physically move your money, take your money out of white banks, put them in black banks, move your child from white school, put them in black school. Move out of a suburb, relocate into black communities. Get a gun, learn how to use it. Outside of that, everything else on the list is pray, remain optimistic, understand, cut the media off, understand that the laws that are put in place were never meant to protect us. They would keep you right where
they would, put you somewhere else.
These laws haven't changed since
they got here.
Vagrancy laws, that came. We are, today is, Juneteenth. So this is the 152nd Juneteenth. So these laws have been on the books for 152 years. If you see a nigga not working for us,
arrest him.
Arrest him.
But that's kind of how it is in the hood.
That's exactly what it is.
You could be arrested for jaywalking across the street.
Yeah, absolutely. That absolutely
does. I've actually had that happen to me, standing on my friend's grandmother's corner. So
yeah,
her house is on the corner, the street is right here, and the corner store is across there. Police officer pulls up and says, "If you step in this street, we're gonna arrest you for jaywalking."
Yeah.
Now what you gonna do in that situation?
Right. Right.
I'm not going to jail for this.
Right.
This makes no sense.
Yeah.
No sense. And then you start talking, and the situation has the potential to escalate immediately.
Especially when you were of that age, right? From, I would say, about 15 to 25. When
stupid.
Yeah, especially if you're a male, right? Because you definitely gonna try to test this testosterone situation. You know, you gonna have to. It's embedded in the DNA.
Yeah, but you can't win.
You can't win. We never win. You know, I have similar stories. You know, the police put me in a police car in front of my house that I had just pulled up in front of. I was in my yard, and they put me in a police car.
What you doing here?
Yeah, I had on a Letterman's jacket with bars on it. Like, clearly, and they tell me, oh, we just got armed robbery.
I fit the description.
Yeah, I fit the description. Like, yeah, I have on a Letterman's jacket. Like, what are you talking about? I'm a high school student. You know, this is... So, I mean, you know, then of course, my mouth, I'm like... in the back of the police car in 5 seconds flat. You know what I mean?
I had that happen at Hampton. I was going to my homeboy's crib, and I was like passing the gas station, and I got pulled over by like 7 cops.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this shit ain't got nothing to do with me. Like, I know I haven't done anything, but when you get pulled over by 7 cops, it makes you nervous.
Yeah, I mean...
And you know, it only takes a second for everything to change.
You know, I can tell you when social media began to be a vehicle to get these stories out, I think we can all cement that place and time as Trayvon Martin, right? Because even Oscar Grant was before that, and it got some attention. But when social media became the brush fire that it is, you know, when you think about what happened with Trayvon Martin, then you think about, I know for a fact what he was told, and he did everything. He was told by his father or even his mother, and he probably did everythh to the letter and to the T. And I know if Trayvon, I definitely would have been Trayvon Martin. You know, my dad, my uncles, everybody, my older brother told me, you know, try to avoid conflict, try not to fight. But if you in a situation where you can't get out of a fight, you try to kill that motherfucker. You know, you try to beat the brakes off of them. And he, you know, the testimony and everything we know, he was saying, leave me alone. Why are you following me? All of this stuff. And then he felt like, okay, I'm just going to have to deal with this right now. And he ended up serving this dude up, and this little punk who probably was beat up in high school and all of this turns to the one piece of power he knows he has over him and kills him. And I can't, there's nothing that I would ever tell my son that would put him in a different situation than what happened there. And that's the reality that we face. It's culturally, there's more opportunities for clashes and conflicts when you are not around your own people. And is it worth whatever perceived better education or all of these other things that you think there are in these suburbs and majority white areas that never really end up that way? Because most of the kids, black kids that I meet in these situations, they don't come out smarter, and they definitely come out more confused about their own identity. But why wouldn't we want to create an incubator and an in vitro situation where we are controlling the environment of our most precious resources, which are our youth? You know, Ramarley Graham, I mean, there's no, it just goes on and on and on about situations where if we could avoid the conflict altogether, that's the only way out. You know, because I'm from the same place where, you know, I'm from the Twin Cities, and this is this is the day after an acquittal or non-guilty verdict of the killer for Philando Castile, and that I fear for my life. I mean, you know, I don't doubt the police officer feared for his life. I don't doubt it. Should he have? You know, this man, by all accounts, was a role model to his, you know, and an asset to his community. And, you know, systematically he's been pulled over and profiled and all of these things that have happened, you know, and before that, you know, Jamar Clark was shot on his back in my neighborhood, a block away from my high school in North Minneapolis, this was, national attention as well. They didn't even bring charges on this police officer. These guys are no different than who I would have been at that age 20 years prior, so we got to find solutions that work for us. Every other community and every other group does this. You go anywhere and you're going to find a little Mexico and a Chinatown and a little Korea and, all of these, Jewtown even, all of these places where there's these safe places, sacred places, enclaves for groups of people within this country. That is actually one of the things that makes America great, actually, is that you can be in all of these, they say melting pot is more like a smorgasbord because there's a different flavor in every city depending on what block you end up on or what section of town you're in, Greektown and all these other things. But we're the only ones who feel like it's worth abandoning that. There should be more little Africas, or there, and there just isn't. And I think that to move the meter for our struggle for freedom and fighting for freedom that we've been doing for 400 years, the next step is to recreate these enclaves that were destroyed in the last 50 to 60 years. I think that's the call for our generation. That's what the Back to Blacklist is about.
Building a black community.
Building a black community, one brick at a time. One family at a time.
How hard is it to get people who live in the suburbs to relocate? Man,
I tell you, when you start telling people about the benefits of being in the city and highlighting it, it's just something not talked about and nobody's ever talked. What happens, and I answer your question, but what happens is especially, they walk me through the same thing because one of the first, I'm going back a little bit, but the first inclination I ever had of something like this was about my experience growing up. Now I have an MBA now. I have 2 degrees. I have an MBA job. I'm in corporate America, executive in corporate America. I've lived in, 2 continents outside of North America, worked in those continents. I've met amazing people from all walks of life. So by every measure and metric, I've made it. Okay. Especially from where I started. But from whence I came, I didn't know anybody like me. And now I know more people like me than not. And so there's a disconnect there, right? So like, how are these people not seen, or like what happened? And I know when I got my first job offer, finishing my bachelor's degree, and I went on the company tour before I got the job offer, and I'm interviewing. They take me on, here's the city and all of this. It was in San Diego. And they put me in a place where there were no black people. San Diego doesn't have a bunch of black people anyway. But even in a 5% black city like San Diego,
they got the Marines out there.
Yeah, but all of those live further out, and definitely they put me in a place where there were no black people. I had to myself
go find you.
Where's the Urban League? Okay, let me find where the Urban League is, because I know if I can find the Urban League, then I'm going to find black people around there, right? That's how I found black people in San Diego. But when they put you on these interviews, and where I grew up in the Twin Cities, North Minneapolis has been black for a very long time. My family's been there for 100 years. 98 years. In 1919, it'll be 100 years. My family's been in North Minneapolis. And, so there's been a black section of Minneapolis for at least 100 years, right? And so, but when people come up there, they got 20 Fortune 500 companies in the Twin Cities, and they all get placed into the suburbs. Oh, this is close to work. Oh, they have all of these things out here. There's never an utter of, well, if you were looking for the things that you need, a hairdresser, a barber, or, all of these things that are conveniently located, they never point them to that, right? So when you start to talk about, hey, the benefits, you're going to have a lower tax base. You're going to be closer to downtown. You're going to be able to run out into the church. You want to go see that preacher on a revival, on a work night. They're closer to, all of these benefits that are there, of being there. You're going to have more house for the value in most places. So meaning you can spend less, refurb it, and still end up spending less than you would if you bought a new fancy house out in the suburbs in most places. And so, you know, when we started talking about that, this was created, like, I said, I was living in Asia. And then we made a very deliberate and concerted effort to just move back to the U.S. and practice what we were preaching, my wife and I. And we picked Atlanta to do so. So Atlanta is a perfect example of like all these black people all around. Very few live within the city limits of Atlanta, right? And so we started talking to our friends. Look, move to the city. We found we got a great house. We live here. There's no violence. You know, all of these things. We're close to this. We're close to historic sites. We live in the, you know, near the historic West End. We go to the place where Martin Luther King announced his, you know, poor people's campaign right on the steps. There's a restaurant right there. We next to Gladys, you know, Chicken and Waffles. You know, all of these places where we're a stone's throw away. You want to support black businesses? That's a conviction you have. It's easy to do here because these are all the black businesses that are here. So when you start talking about that, you know, we've been here 2 years. We start talking about that, and you know, I can account for one friend who made the move within those 2 years. And we got friends who living in New York City and Brooklyn like, yo, I'm moving to Atlanta. I took a job in Morehouse because what you guys talk about. I want to live in Atlanta now. I want to live in the city. I want to practice this back to black list. We have other friends who, I got word from one of my friends I never thought would live in the inner city. And they just said, we are buying a crib in the inner city. They just bought a house in the suburbs like a year ago, not even a year ago. And they said, no, it's listed. And we are making a move into the inner city. And so, you know, people are open to hearing that because it's not something that's so foreign. It's just foreign. We are not doing it. It's foreign to us. But other people are doing it. Yeah, they've been doing it.
And they're going to keep doing it.
And they're going to keep doing it, right?
Their money's going to stay in their community.
Yeah. It is, you know, it's interesting.
Keep bringing people in.
Absolutely.
The situation up.
Yeah. And, you know, it's all positive too, right? This makes a better America and a better world, right? People hear it and they see it and they think, you know, some of my white friends, oh, this is like desegregation. Like, no, you can do the back to black list too. You know, we're saying we want people who are qualified, who are upwardly mobile to live in these communities that have been written off as just blight and despair and nobody there, you know. And so if you move in and you support the black business, you don't have to be black to support a black business. You don't have to be black to bank at a black bank. But we know that the benefit, those people are going to hire people. Those people are going to give loans to people who need them, who don't get them, black people, right? So you can be white and do that if you feel so compelled to do so, right? But I'd be crazy if I went on a mission trying to get a whole bunch of white folks to do it with the people who have the greatest benefits of doing so look like me. So it's not about like a desegregation. However,
but they stay in their own neighborhoods.
Exactly.
In their own banks.
So King, you know, Martin Luther King, right? So everyone looks at him as the great, you know, everyone has accepted him for at least a whitewashed version of what they try to make him sound like, which is I have a dream and nonviolence, which he was those things, but he was much more than that as well. And one of the things that he talked about in great detail was about when he looks at integration, even after the wins of 64 with the Voting Rights Act and then 67 with the Housing and Equal, you know, Economic Opportunity Council Acts, you know, the affirmative action, basically all of these things. He talked about, and of course, integration from the buses to the schools and everything else. He talked about, you know, what we don't want to have happen is this integration out of power, which had been happening. So the quote that Harry Belafonte always mentions King saying of where he said, you know, I fear that I may have led my people into a burning house. He's talking about this idea of integration, how it was carved up, which was never integration at all. It was like integrating black people out of the base of power that they actually had, which was in their own communities. So he says we want to be integrated into power, not integrated out of power, right?
Essentially, we have been
integrated out of power. So this is saying let's integrate ourselves into the power that we should have within our own communities. We should control the narratives and the direction and definitely the damn police in our own communities, right? And this is not to paint a picture of like, drugs aren't real, drug dealers aren't real, gangs aren't real, but there aren't more drugs being used in inner cities. We know for a fact there's less drug being used in the hood than in suburbia, and especially middle America, white suburbia.
If you have any kind of sense, like a hood or any hood anywhere in any city in America is this big.
Right.
It's not the entire city.
No, yeah, it's a very small.
The south side of Chicago is just in small parts.
Small parts. Of Chicago. Now it wreaks a lot of damage because there's no economy.
There's no economy and the people sick.
Yeah, so
and they need help. Right. Role models.
Yeah, so there's no other option for them, right? So I mean, so the thing is not to say that the epidemic or the pandemic there's a cure and a vaccine for it. It's called economy, and we can't build a micro economy, a black economy on the sidelines living in the suburbs, and that's the most important thing, and that's the point of the Back to Black list. So whether it's the occupation of our communities by the military police, which it ends up being.
Now they have AR-15s, body armor,
all of that, tanks. Yeah. The police force got tanks, right? So we're being occupied.
Trained, though, to be military.
No, they're not. They're not even near being trained for that. They just get all of this surplus because the budget.
Black people.
Yeah, when they talk about the budget, they never talk about military spending. So of the discretionary budget, military is over half of it. And so,
what if you took that budget and built better schools, or you paid teachers more money?
Right, but see, now you recording this now. This is how you get the FBI watching us. You start talking about breaking down the military-industrial complex, right? So, okay, that's not going. Let's focus on what we can control, right? What we can control is our communities. We can say we appreciate the tanks, but we don't really want them here, right? So, there's still an opportunity to do that. I at least like to think so, or be optimistic in that way to say that, right? But the point is, whether it's the police or whether it's the drug dealer, all of that can be fixed if the right people move it. It does happen. We have precedents and evidence of it. We have it because we see gentrification happen. We see Brooklyn. 2015 when I moved back to the States, I was in New York City working on something, and I was with, I met a homeboy there, and we are in Harlem. We are on 125 in St. Nick at midnight, and these white folks are walking their dog on 125th in St. Nick. It's a wrap, B. Like this is the epicenter of black culture in America. Ain't it? This is you might as well be a Louis Armstrong or Congo Square in New Orleans, 125th St. Nick. This is Slauson and and Crenshaw. This is Stony and 87th in the south side of Chicago. This is 7 Mile in Detroit. This is the middle of black America.
And we're not even there.
And we got white folks walking their dog at midnight and not scared about nothing. But we scared to go face our own selves. That's where we at. That's where we're at with it. And that's what the call and the plea is. And so, I have been very vocal about it. And at times I feel like not many people are listening. But turns out folks are listening and are considering some different options. So I'm hopeful. Everybody thinks that, I'm like this, at least revolutionary mind and so like leftist. Which is not true at all. Like, that's not me at all. I'm very optimistic in the belief of our own people. But I got that belief from understanding what's happened in our history. So I'm a big history buff, and especially if it's about African history throughout the world. And obviously, the what I know the most about is African American history, right? So if you ever need like a Jeopardy question answered or a trivia game for Black history, I'm the dude to do it. You know what I'm saying? But the point is, because history has shown us the way and how we can overcome insurmountable odds time and time again, people don't know the history. But I'm optimistic about it. You know what I'm saying?
If you're not, then what would you be doing?
Well, I be out in these suburbs.
Exactly.
Being an individual, feeling like I'm doing enough because I ain't robbing nobody, I ain't shooting nobody, I ain't shank nobody. When that's not enough. That's just simply not enough to just be going about and living your life. Like we owe it to our ancestors and to ourselves and to our future generations to unify in a collective and be about building something. And I say it's black community. I have two specific goals in life, and that's to help build strong black community and help build strong black businesses.
Can you give us a quick recap of the Back to Black list? 1 to 10.
1 to 10. Get armed. Get yourself a registered gun. Learn how to use it for self-defense. That's number 1. Number 2, relocate into black communities. Place your children in predominantly black schools. Number 3, take your money out of white banks and find black banks. Number 4, when possible, stop buying things from white businesses and spend with or create black businesses. Number 5, pray for the strength to sacrifice these small things. Don't let apathy set. Do something productive for us. Number 6, be positive and optimistic and filled with hope. There really is no room for anything else if we want to see the change. Let's all just be the change agents. Number 7, turn off all major news outlets. Watch TV One, listen to local community radio, buy black newspapers and read them online. Find some blog, radio stations, and podcasts. And then there's a quote. It says, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. That's by Malcolm X. Number 8 says, never forget that the system wasn't designed to include you. Persons of African descent cannot be, nor were ever intended to be, citizens under the U.S. Constitution. That's a direct quote from the decision write-up in the Dred Scott case by SCOTUS. That's Supreme Court of the United States Chief Judge. What was his name? Taylor? I think it was Taylor. So interestingly enough, this is just well. Let me recap and I'll come back to that. Number 9, focus on the work we can do outside of policy. Politics aren't the only answer. A little less complaint and whining and a little more dogged work and manly striving would do us more credit than 1,000 civil rights bills. That's a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. And number 10, read, think, and discuss. Begin with Powernomics and Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson. Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Black Reconstruction by Du Bois. And Black Economics by Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. These are books that'll get your mind right. But what I was gonna say, so that's 1 through 10 of the Back to Black list.
It's like people in America are living like we're in India.
Yeah. And we're not Black America, we ain't too far away from it. Think if the smartest Nigerians and Jamaicans and Haitians never went home. They go home though.
They do.
They go and they get educated and they get work and they help their own people. But we're not doing it.
Get smart. Go to the suburbs.
Yeah, we're not doing it.
Hang out at the cookout, play with the dog by the pool.
Exactly. And we exploit the hood, but we're not building it, which is shame on us.
Well, yeah, I think that is it for this podcast. Brought to you in part by, I was going to say something catchy, but we're going to leave it. This
brought to you in part by Lady Eloise, the finest provider of hair extensions under the brand name Madali Hair.
Is it synthetic?
No, not at all. Pure. Virgin.
100%.
Yes.
Ooh, 17.5 4-pack. I looked at that hair. I was like, God damn, people spend this much money for hair?
More. I'm now the chairman of the company I founded, but the mission was to definitely find the best hair, not charge the highest price, and deliver the best customer service. And so there are others out there that charge more and have less and more inferior hair.
What's the website that people can go to?
www.madalihair.com. MADALI hair.com.